It's the most redundant part of the draft. It's the small guards. It's not the sexiest topic, but we think there are some that could actually really stand out in this year's draft. Who are some of those names? Find out on Locked On NBA Big Board. What's up? My name is Richard Stayman. You might know me better as @MavsDraft on Twitter. All week, I've been joined by Leif Thulin. Leif is one of the smartest college basketball minds out there. So naturally, I brought him in. I didn't really bring him in. We decided to do this to go over some of the top college guards that are small. Again, it's not exactly the flashiest position, 6'2" and under guards, but we wanted to talk about it. So thank you very much for making Locked On NBA Big Board the first listen of your day. We really appreciate it, whether we're talking about the biggest players in the draft or the smallest like we're doing today. We really appreciate you sticking with us. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Game off. We got to talk more about Monopoly Go. This fast-paced game lets you team up with friends for tournaments to unlock awesome prizes like unique stickers for trading, cool playing pieces, and hilarious emojis for taunting your friends. So download Monopoly Go now, free on Google Play and the App Store. Game on. I have a lot of friends who have been playing that, so that hits dear and home, close to the heart. Leif, let's go over some of these small guards. Let's go big picture first and foremost before we dive into any of the names. How small is too small for these guards? And also, just as a background before you answer that, we're cutting this off really 6'3", like tops, maybe 6'3.5".
Well, I think my number 2 player in the entire class fits in a small guard, and that's Rob Dillingham. So that's where I would start it off in terms of, I think you have to be a special playmaker with the ball in your hands or an unbelievable defensive pest with an ability to shoot to be considered in terms of the first round. I think there's players at the latter stage of this where we're going to talk about where I think they can be second-round picks because they have a natural gift on one side of the basketball. And we'll talk about those guys. But I think in terms of how small is too small to be a winning player, you have to either be unbelievable with the ball in your hands as like the guy. Think of Trae Young as the main archetype of this. Or you have to be kind of the Javon Carter, Patrick Beverly on the other side of the spectrum who you defend and you can hit open shots. And those guys are coveted, but less coveted than someone who may shoot worse, may not be as good on the ball, but happens to be 3 inches taller. And that's just the reality of the situation.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the star mold, the players under 6 foot, like really shorter than 6'1", so 6 foot and shorter, it's really one player in today's game that's still playing at a very high level, and that's Fred VanVleet. The other guys have had their peaks. Kyle Lowry is listed at 6 feet, Chris Paul, Mike Conley. Obviously, you're a Jazz guy. You've seen him. Isaiah Thomas is notorious, or not notorious, but really famous for being, one of the most successful small guards of our generation as well. I agree, though. Like, if you have that gravity that a lot of these, like, there's a lot of small guards who really know how to score the basketball and create space and all that, but they don't know how to create gravity both for themselves and themselves and others. That's where I think that really comes an issue. Like you said, if they don't have that defensive trait as well, like if they don't know how to use every little disadvantage they have to their advantage, such as Jacob Gilyard's a prime example, all-time steals leader in college basketball. He has some of the best hands, one of the smartest players on the defensive end in terms of, like, at least among small guards. And that stuff, it really stands out. That's what gets you on an NBA court, even when the odds are against you. So I guess I got a little trivia for you. How many players do you think played in the NBA this year that were 6 feet and below?
I'm going to go with 3.
3? Nah, you got a little bit. Let's change it. It was higher than 3. It was quadruple that. But if you say 5'11" and shorter, it is actually 3. And just for comparison, let's just see what happens if you do 2013, 14, 10 years ago. I'm going to pull this up as we are speaking. This is a kind of impromptu plan, but how many do you think it was 10 years ago that were 5'11" and shorter?
I'll go 25.
No, way off, but I appreciate the effort. It was 9. So still, though, like, it's not a huge number, but to go from, that's a massive reduction, 9 to 3. The league keeps getting bigger.
Oh, so that was still for 5'11". I was going for 6 foot, but your point is still standing.
I'll cut you some slack. I'm sure if we up it to 6 foot, it's probably near 25 because you got Kyle Lowry, Chris Paul are also there, obviously. But actually 21. Leafs on point with the trivia. But the point is, right, the league is getting increasingly bigger, so it's harder and harder as a small guard to stand out. Like, we see some great college guards really stand out, but they just don't translate up to the NBA because they're too small. So just curious on your thoughts of that trend and what it generally means for this class of these guys that we have listed.
Well, I think what's becoming more and more coveted is positional size because you see teams that have small ball fives, but their fours are bigger than typical fours. Their twos and threes are bigger than typical twos and threes. Their point guard is 6'6" all of a sudden, and so what's being coveted is the backcourt players are asked to be bigger than they typically have been. Like, what are some of the biggest strengths you see in this year's class between like Stefan Castle, Cody Williams, Matas Buzelis? All those guys are huge for their position. And so that's the plus. But if they were to be coming in a couple of years ago, they'd be seen as a position higher up in terms of the 1 through 5 scale. And so I think it's becoming a little bit of an overreaction to like, okay, my Utah Jazz had two diminutive guards in their backcourt, struggled defensively. So now every team in the NBA is trying to make that a point to not happen to them. And I think there's going to be some reversal of like, okay, well, Rob Dillingham's really good with the basketball. And if we have the supporting wings around him, I don't think his lack of defensive ability is really going to bother too many teams. But I do think you have to have some unbelievable traits to make it through if you're not if you're going to be that small in today's NBA.
Yeah, I agree. And let's just talk about Rob Dillingham because he does have a lot of those unbelievable traits. You said you have him number 2 on your board. Is that correct?
Yep. Number 2. And I think the reason you'd take Rob Dillingham, and I made this pitch on the Big Board episode for those of you listening every dares, we appreciate you. But I think that Rob Dillingham is like a watered down version of Trae Young in the way that he plays. Like, he's not as good as Trae Young as a shooter, even though his numbers are sensational, 45% from three, 50% as a catch and shoot. But Trae Young had this unbelievable range where once he crossed half court, you were picking him up at Oklahoma, and he could score 27 and give you 10 assists at any game. Dillingham was really good, and he was on a better team than Trae Young, and he was coming off the bench, so his numbers weren't indicative of how good he is. But what I see from him is I think he's a little twitchier, kind of high-powered version of Darius Garland. That if Garland didn't have Donovan Mitchell and was asked to score a little more, that's the role you can anticipate from Rob Dillingham. You get maybe 21 points, 7 assists, and not good defense, but 21 points is more than just about anyone in this class I think is capable of scoring, even at their peak in this class. Dillingham could do that from pretty, like, I won't say day one, but pretty quickly in his NBA career, and that's why I've elevated him up. So despite being diminutive both in stature and height and weight, like, he's very thin, I think he's got this quick twitch, electric ability to create what he wants for himself and others, whereas a lot of players in this class have neither of the two.
Yeah, and this is why for him it's just so important. I think that he has to land in the right spot. Like, if he gets to the Spurs, having Wemby behind him makes up for so much. And honestly, like Devin Vassell alongside him too on the wings, like, that makes up for so much of his weaknesses on the defensive end, where it's like if he were to draw up one of the best places for his entire mistakes to be erased, it's probably San Antonio long term. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think if you put him with Wembanyama, that's ideal. I think there's a couple landing spots for Dillingham that are better than others, but I think he'll be effective offensively pretty much anywhere. That would maximize him on that end. Obviously, you have a lob threat and someone who's a tremendous companion in Wembanyama to grow with, but defensively, he erases so many of the mistakes.
Yeah, and I think for him on offense too, like, just moving to that side, like, we talked a ton about the defense, but on offense, really, you got to look at too, like, he's going to take a jump not being at Kentucky. I mean, we see it all the time, the Kentucky guards, right? So I think that's, for me, that's a huge jump. Not only is his playmaking going to get better, but he can score 20 points a game. Kind of like you said, he will play the Darius Garland role. And next to Victor Wembanyama, Devin Vassell, whoever else they bring in for that young core, I think it'd be a really, really good foundation. Like, to me, the Spurs should do one of two things. Find a way to get Rob Dillingham, or you get Trae Young. Like, there's really those are the 2 point guards you should be looking at. Like, I think I would agree that if Rob Dillingham went to the Spurs, he's probably the number 2 player in the draft.
Yeah, I think that's the case. Do we want to talk about his teammate, who's still diminutive for the 2 guard, which he played, and that's Reed Sheppard. And we didn't have him in this list, but it just dawned on me, like, he's not big for a point guard. He's really small for a 2. What do you make of him?
I'll keep it quick. I think he's a little bit different because he's got that elite role off ball. Like, technically, I thought about him, but I wanted to keep him off because, like, we're already talking about Dillingham, but also he does so much of what we described where he has those elite traits. These guys don't have that. Like, Reed Sheppard's not the most well-rounded prospect. None of these guys are because they're 6'1" and under, 6'2" and under, really. Or I guess really 6'3". I think with that shot, like we talked about him ad nauseum, and I think he'll actually be a great exception to the rule. He's got the best chance. I mean, I have him number 3 on my board. What do you think?
I think you really have to have hope in terms of how much his playmaking comes through. Obviously, there's been players like Tyrese Maxey. Many scouts have been reported even recently didn't think he had the playmaking ability. So they took him to be a 2 guard and they didn't really know what he could do. And obviously, he's really good right now. Most improved player, an all-star. You see Cason Wallace didn't have the ball in his hands a lot, but he's found to roll off the ball. So the thing about Sheppard for me is I don't believe the defensive stats actually will scale up. But I do think because he can shoot, he's still going to be a lottery pick. I'm lower on him than you are. I have him 11 on my board.
Yeah, I think that just comes down to philosophy again, kind of like we said, with the size of guards and the roles and the expectations of those guards. Let's talk about KJ Simpson, Mark Spears, Reese Beekman, and Jamal Shead when coming up. But first, let me tell you about Monopoly Go. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go in general. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You've already talked about that at the beginning, but there's so much more good stuff in this game. Again, like I said, I have a lot of friends who played this game and got me into it. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with your friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. Not a big board, but just a board. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock, and there's so much more to get. You can get unique stickers that you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes. You can get cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, and also hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and you have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on the YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels apps, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. So back here with Leif Thulin. My name is Richard Stayman. Let's talk about 2 other smaller guards. We're just going to kind of rapid fire through these the rest of the way. KJ Simpson, somebody that has been on my radar for quite some time. I liked him when I started watching Tristan da Silva. I think it was the Myrtle Beach Classic, I want to say against A&M in 2022. I really liked what they did. They popped on my radar. I never expected KJ to ever grow to be this because up until this year, he was really inefficient. He was kind of in that, he's a good college guard, but like, how does he scale up? He doesn't even break 40%. And then this year he goes out and just has an absolute monster breakout year. I actually have him top 45 on my board. What do you think of KJ and his chances to translate?
I've been anti KJ for most of his college career because I watched a ton of Pac-12 and I was like, well, he doesn't play like a point guard, and I don't think he's big enough for a 2 guard. Well, this year he got better. I still have my reservations about his playmaking, but his shooting percentage, his pace of the game, it used to be kind of like one speed, like all the way to the rim or a pull-up 3. And now he's got the intermediate. He's got this kind of poise that you kind of attribute to maturation. And I believe he's got a chance. His swing skill will be how well does he shoot off the dribble coming off screens at the NBA level. It's a deeper 3. He was inconsistent throughout his college career from 3. And then when he penetrates, how well can he distribute? Because often when he penetrated, he was just all the way to the rack. And I don't see him quite having that top end athleticism to get there. So I'm a little lower on KJ than you are, but I do think his season warrants that type of grade. I just haven't been able to unsee as much of what I saw so frequently for the first couple of years of his college career.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. I personally, I've been watching a ton of him. I think he has arguably the best floater, if not absolutely the best floater in the game, in the draft. I mean, he's great at using screens. I think he thrives on handoffs. He also has an amazing defensive anticipation. I saw him against Arizona recently. I went back and watched a game, not the one they got completely blown out in at Arizona. It was the one they got semi blown out in at home against Arizona. But he was making some plays where he read the play about 3 seconds in advance. And I don't think I've ever seen it quite as clear as that, where a guy reads the play fully, rotates, and the offense player has no idea that he's read the play. So it's a combo of both. But I think that intelligence is just really strong. And I buy the jump shot, the spin, the arc, all of it looks really good, really projectable. My only concern is really, is he disciplined on ball defensively? I still haven't been able to figure that out, because as a sophomore, that was absolutely the case. He was not. Other than that, I actually think he could be really good, though.
Yeah, KJ is interesting. I think of this quartet of guards, I buy his offense the most of him, Mark Sears, Reese Beekman, and Jamal Shead. And I think his pathway to playing is the clearest. All he has to do is compete on defense, which he's a good athlete. He can defend, like you mentioned. His anticipation is really good, and offensively, he's further ahead than those guys because he can score at 3 levels and he's got the burst to do so. He doesn't only rely on that floater and that guile. He gets all the way to the cup fairly frequently, and his jump shot really improved. I think he's probably the most draftable of those 4. One other guard that I think we might want to throw in there is Devin Carter, who's 6'3", and he plays a different style. So he's not necessarily a point guard. But when I was thinking of Javon Carter, I made myself think. I was like, I wonder if Devin Carter is 6'3" or under. Well, Devin Carter is 6'3", but he gets 9 rebounds a game. So that's his trait that sticks on the floor. He's got defense. And then he forced himself to be the offensive scorer when Hopkins went down for Providence. So he's another guy that I think, so just so people don't get mad at us in the comments and say, well, Devin Carter's 6'3", I wanted to cover the bases there because Devin Carter is the next best of the guards that are 6'3" and under. So we're not skipping out on him, but I think he's more of a 2 guard, less of a point guard at the next level. And we're trying to focus this on point guards.
Yeah, and also I tried choosing just like, I think both of us were like, okay, 1 6'3" guy and everybody else shorter, because 6'3" is now the new 6'1". I think that's where the cutoff is. I mean, there's a ton of guys on my board like Devin Carter as well, Reed Sheppard, that are listed at 6'3", but they just, I don't know, they're not your typical 6'3" guards. Like you said, Devin Carter averaged almost 9 rebounds a game. Like he's going to be one of the most physical guards in the entire NBA as a rookie. So I think that is why he's not on here. Whereas you get guys like Mark Sears, for example, who plays a little bit more of that finesse below the rim style. Not that necessarily all the other guys are like mad dunkers, but just that play style of pure finesse, trying to, like, he uses his size to his advantage and isn't necessarily trying to play bigger than he is. What do you think of Mark Sears? Pitch me on him, because I go back and forth.
I'm lower on Mark Sears than some, just because I think people watched Mark Sears get into the Final Four, and he was really good in that game against UConn. He was really good against Carolina. He was really good against Clemson. And they said, "Wow, this guy is lefty. He resembles Jalen Brunson because they're both a little thicker in stature, and they're like they're the same size. They both have a kind of fundamentally sound game." I don't think he's Jalen Brunson at all. So the people I think have raised him because they saw Jalen Brunson comps. Well, Jalen Brunson like has 5 different speeds with which he plays. Like he's able to play off of 2 feet. He's able to post you up. He's able to go behind screens. And this is at Nova. This is not Jalen Brunson on the Knicks. This is what he was as the National Player of the Year at Villanova. He came off of screens. He played out of the post. He came off of pick and rolls and he passed. What Sears does well is he wants to shoot the ball and he sees you're not like going to guard it right away, and he goes all the way to the rim and gets to his left hand. He's good at getting back to his left hand. He's crafty in that sense. He switches between 1 and 2 speeds. It's either I'm going to pull up and lull you to sleep, or I'm going to burst right by you. He doesn't have the same finesse nor the shot making ability or creation of Brunson. So I want to dispel that before kind of breaking in. The reason I'm lower is I don't think Sears can defend. And though his shot was good at Alabama, he's not much of a catch and shoot guy. He's more like his volume, I should say. Like Alabama shoots a ton of threes, but a lot of what Sears did was he would be the recipient of either wide open swings, or he'd shoot the ones off of the dribbles behind screens. And I just don't know if the Alabama system that prioritized threes or layups, so much so the NBA does too. I understand that, so much so in a league and a collegiate basketball world that it was novel. I don't know if he was kind of the beneficiary of the novelty as opposed to the beneficiary of his work. Like, he's not really good athlete by any standard in college. He won't be in the NBA, and he'll be so reliant on offense to stay on the court. I think he'll have to be a really, really good pick and roll guard, and I have my hesitations about his passing out of the pick and roll. I think he's draftable, but I wouldn't put him in that top 45 that we were kind of discussing.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure he's the only one of the guys we've listed that had 0 dunks for this entire year. But you look at the stat sheet, I mean, 21.5 points per game on 51% shooting, 43.5% from three, 86% from free throw line, 4 assists, 4 rebounds, a steal and a half. Like, he really didn't turn it over even that much. I don't know. Like, you look at the stats and it's right, and it looks nice. The big concern I've had about his game scaling up, I personally think he's going to be a great college guard and G League guard. I think it's just too competitive, especially he's one of these guys where it's like, what is his standout trait for being a small guard in the NBA? I think you can point every other player we've talked about has that standout trait. I think Rob Dillingham's electric scoring is so much more translatable and honestly just can be a variable in every single way. You don't know if he's going left, right. You don't know what move he's going to put on you, if he wants to go inside out, like how if he wants to do step back and then step back in. If he's going to do the step back, he has so many different ways to beat you that I just don't think Sears does. The other thing, though, is I think he struggles to shoot over bigs, especially on isolation switches. So that to me is such automatic. I'm out on that. That was something I remember Kennedy Chandler had an issue with, and I think it's a big part of why he hasn't stuck in the league. So for me, I'm personally out on Mark Sears. But any final thoughts on Sears before we get to the next guys?
I think he's a better basketball player than Chandler. Chandler was a better athlete, and you'd hoped, okay, his basketball will improve. Sears is a finished product in the terms of he's a polished guard.
Yep.
So he'll be more able to like run you a backup team. Like if he's going to be a kind of a two-way player or like the last guy on your team and an injury pushes him up, I think he can run an offense, knock down open shots. I don't see that as someone I would want to draft earlier. But that said, I think the maturation and just getting someone who knows who they are as opposed to needing to develop kind of is alluring. So I think 45 to 60 is a fine spot for Sears. I don't think he's as good a player as KJ Simpson. I honestly prefer the next two we're going to talk about that are defensively oriented in Reese Beekman and Jamal Shead. But I can see the appeal of why you'd want Sears over a freshman one and done, kind of like what Kennedy Chandler was, who was selected 38th a few years ago.
Yeah, agreed. I think he'll need the right fit. Well, let's talk about some of the other guys. But first, let's talk about eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the price you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. So, Leif, let's bring this home. Let's talk about some of these defensive-oriented guards. Reese Beekman, you're a Virginia guy. Let's just talk about him because we got to see him at the Combine pretty closely. If there's a reason that he fails in the NBA and a reason that he thrives in the NBA, let's just say he gets a backup guard spot. What are the reasons for each end?
Well, if he were to thrive, he becomes a solid shooter because he's really good on the ball. Like, I think he was the best defender pretty easily at the Combine last year of those who participated in the games. Like, he was a hound on the ball. Whoever he was guarding had a bad time trying to even handle the pressure, much less score. So he was a nightmare in that regard. He's a really good leader who's been forced into a role that doesn't necessarily complement the way he wants to play. He was asked to be the scorer at Virginia the last 2 years. And Virginia plays really slowly. I think Beekman's excellent in transition. The few times Virginia's gotten out in transition, Beekman gets to the rim. He's pretty good at finishing with either hand. He's a strong guard who's kind of, he's got a wiry frame, but he's good at absorbing physical contact, both against ones and twos. Like I remember he guarded Terrence Shannon Jr., not this past season, but the season before in a preseason tournament, and Keontae George, and he won the battle with both of them. Keontae George was obviously the 16th pick, who had a really good season for my Utah Jazz. And then Shannon would have been a first-team All-American had he not gotten into legal issues, and I would argue the second or third best player in college basketball last year. And he clearly won those type of matchups. But to answer your question, if he shoots well, I think he can thrive pretty easily. Now, if he struggles in the NBA, I think it's going to be a lack of confidence offensively, because defensively, I think everything he does is exceptional. I think he's pretty much Trey Jones. Like they're pretty much the same player, and Beekman might even be a touch like quicker defending the ball, and he has got longer arms. His steal rates are unbelievable for the way that Virginia plays slowly and not very high. But I mean, it's not often you see a two-time defensive player of the year in the ACC come from the guard spot. So I think you can expect a Trey Jones type of career. I think Jones might be a touch ahead of him as a shooter, though.
I like that comp. Yeah, I similar sentiments. I would add, just as a playmaker, like I really do trust his point guard skills. Like just my guy Garrett Johnson, Half Awake Takes on Twitter, I'd highly recommend giving him a follow. He put out a video on Reese, and one of the things I'd never noticed before with such fine detail was Garrett pointed out how like every single pass he gets into this shooter's shooting pocket. And I just feel like you give him an NBA offseason and better talent and everything, I think he's going to make his shooters a lot better. Like he is somebody that truly makes everybody better around him. And at Virginia, they ran like notoriously slow offense. I think that's something where in the NBA and more tempo, you're going to see his playmaking really pop. But like you said, the jump shot's really bad. To me, I wrote down when I saw it last year in person, I was like, okay, the free throw percentage has always been like fine, never bad, never really good. But at the same time, like the 3-point percentage is bad. Why? And when we saw him shooting right in front of us at the combine, I remember thinking, like, does it hurt him to shoot? Like everything looked labored. That was the exact notes I wrote on him. And I some things you just can't unsee on that. And I think that's absolutely almost a fatal flaw. I think he's somebody that's going to grind his way and make it work because he makes everybody else around him better with or without the jumper. So I like Beekman, though. What about Jamal Shead from Houston?
I think Jamal Shead is going to find a way onto an NBA roster being an absolute pit bull. He is I'll say it this way. Virginia's defense is really good because they slow you down. They make you play at their tempo, and Beekman's easily the best point of attack defender Bennett's had in years, and that included like Malcolm Brogdon and some other very good defenders. But what changes Beekman to Shead is Shead will push the pace, and he will be the alpha as a scorer and a leader more willingly. Yes, I don't think that's what he'll do in the NBA. So I don't think there's much of a difference, even though Shead was a first-team All-American and Beekman was not decorated at all. I think they're very similar. Beekman's bigger than Shead. I think his length will be more important than Shead's tenacity on the ball because Beekman doesn't lack that. Shead is a slightly better shooter, but I still think a bad shooter at the NBA level. So it really depends for Shead. Obviously, shooting is going to be the swinging skill for both of them, but I'm going to break it down further. It's going to be how well do the two of them adapt to playing pick and roll offense when both of them have kind of played either an ISO for Shead, who got a lot of his buckets through ISO being quicker than his opponents and kicking out to shooters or dumping off to bigs, and for Beekman, who played in a blocker mover offense in which he didn't get much opportunity to attack the rim. So I think Beekman's a slightly better prospect than Shead, but Shead's going to be looked at more fondly because of the season that he had, being given more opportunities to be the scorer. But I think both are draftable, and I expect both to make opening day rosters.
Yeah, I should disagree here. I'm pretty low on Jamal Shead and just in general of his game translating. He has better free throw numbers, ever so slightly, actually, throughout his career than Reese Beekman. But the big concern for me, and I actually think he might be a better passer too. I know I just praised Reese Beekman's ability to like make everybody better as a playmaker, but I think Jamal Shead's absolute shortcoming is he's a 6'1" guard. Like this is really where the stereotype hurts. Is he's a 6'1" guard who has shot over 41% and a half once in his career, and it was his freshman year when he took 3 shots a game in 10 minutes. So he really has struggled with efficiency. He's a career 29% three-point shooter, never really has found success beyond the arc, even though he has touch. He absolutely could be an exception to that rule. I just think it's going to take so much time. And when you're a senior and you're undersized with those issues, I think your window to actually get better is so thin. I don't see him ever cracking an NBA rotation. He's the guy who I think I'm lowest on, actually probably second lowest on this list, because at least he brings one elite skill like we talked about. I don't see it with Mark Sears personally having the elite skill.
I think Shead will make a roster because you need someone to have that energy, and if you have an injury, he comes in and he steps in seamlessly. I have no doubt about his work ethic, his leadership, and those type of intangibles make you more enticing to be selected or a preferred kind of like undrafted, hey, we want this guy, as opposed to some guys who are more offensively oriented and smaller. Like I'd rather have someone who understands their role isn't to score for the first time in 2.5 years since he took over with an injured Houston team that made the Elite Eight in 2022. I think he's going to understand, look, I don't need to score. All I got to do is play with energy, heart, rebound the best I can, and pass the ball in transition. And that's really good for me. I think he's more Javon Carter than Beekman or I mentioned Devin Carter. That was just because they had to share the same last name. But I see a way where he plays. I think Beekman's better though. I prefer Beekman over Shead.
Well, let's do this. We did this with the bigs. Let's do the exact same thing. I'll go first. I'll rank them, and then you rank them. We got the 5 guys, right? We got Rob Dillingham, KJ Simpson, Mark Sears, Reese Beekman, Jamal Shead. So I go Rob Dillingham safely. He's the only first rounder of this group. Next, I go KJ Simpson, a hair over Reese Beekman. Then I go Jamal Shead, kind of for the same reasons, the tiebreaker over Sears. I feel like I see that light. Like you convinced me pretty well. Like you need somebody to come in and play some defense and bring that energy. Jamal Shead can do that even like as long as you have the shooting around him. But if you put him on like Orlando, it may be less of a ideal situation. And then Mark Sears last. What's yours?
I would go Dillingham, obviously 1. 2, I think I'd go Simpson a touch over Beekman. I think they're really close for me. And then so that's 2 and 3. 4 and 5, I could talk myself into Sears or Shead. I think I would go Sears over Shead just because shooting is becoming so important in basketball right now. And though he's smaller, I think there's more of an opportunity for a guy to come in and just run the offensive ship and have lower expectations defensively than there is for someone to change the game defensively from the point guard spot. I personally like Shead more, like in terms of the way he played in college basketball and what he meant to his team. But I think that Sears is going to be more desirable to more teams than Jamal Shead. I actually was surprised Shead didn't go back to Houston with LJ Cryer, with a few of the other guys going back and see if they could run it back one more time. But I'm excited. I hope he makes a team because he's one of those like junkyard dogs you have to like when he's on your team.
Yeah, and I think he's somebody, like you said, you want him on your team. You don't want to play against him. Well, for Leif Thulin, my name is Richard Stayman. Don't forget, check out the Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or the Amazon Fire TV. It's free and available on both of those. Leave a comment. Let us know how you would rank these 5 guys: Rob Dillingham, KJ Simpson, Mark Sears, Reese Beekman, and Jamal Shead. Thank you so much for listening, and have a good rest of your day.